All right, so on Canvas, these notes are your virus notes. A couple of things that we're going to be talking about today are what is a virus, the terminology for viruses, and how viruses got discovered. So on your notes, we're going to begin with what is a virus. First of all, you're going to write this down, and it is an agent that causes disease in plants and animals. So viruses cause diseases in us, in plants, in animals, anything pretty much that is living. They're segments of nucleic acids, which is pretty much DNA and RNA, and viruses are contained in a protein coat. So contained in some type of coat of protein. And lastly, a virus is not a cell. As you can tell, my mouse is circling it here. It is not a cell. You're going to write those three things down. And so a couple of things is viruses are not considered to be alive. They're considered to be non-living because they do not have some of these characteristics that give us life. And a couple of things that I want you to write all three of these down, and you can determine this on yourself. Are you living? Do you grow? Well, yes, you grow, so you are technically living. Do you maintain homeostasis? Again, homeostasis from our last lectures would be, do you maintain a normal body temperature? Or do you maintain the outside of your body from the inside of your body? Well, yes, you do that. So, of course, there you're checking off another box. You have another characteristic of life. Lastly, do you metabolize, which is do you eat? Yes, you eat, so therefore you checked off the third box for characteristics of life, meaning that you are alive. But viruses do not have any of these three things. They do not grow, they cannot maintain homeostasis, and lastly, they do not eat, so they are not alive. But they are similar to us in a couple of ways, in two ways mainly. The two ways that I want you to write down. Number one is they contain nucleic acids, meaning DNA or RNA. And lastly, they contain proteins. Our cells do this as well. Our cells have a couple of other things in common with this, with viruses, but mainly they contain nucleic acids, which is DNA or RNA. And lastly, they have proteins, which in viruses are the form of a capsid. And we'll learn about that here in a second. So we've got a little bit of terminology. I'm going to go through this fast so you can pause the video and write it down. But a pathogen is an agent that causes disease. A host is an organism that shelters or nourishes something else. You will need to know that a host of something is where an organism invades a host and uses its nourishment to keep its body alive. A capsid is a protein coat on a virus. So the surrounding of a virus is called a capsid, which is right there on the inside. An envelope surrounds the capsid, so it helps the virus enter it. A couple more of these are bacteriophage, and I think you only have to write down one thing on these. A virus that attacks only a bacteria. A prophage or a provirus is a viral DNA segment inserted into a bacterial cell. So we'll get to that later on. But you will need to know that retrovirus is a virus that replicates by first going from RNA and turning it into DNA. One of these is HIV. Lysis or lyse is the breaking apart of a cell. And then viroid is one single strand of viral RNA that causes plant disease. So we'll get to those later on as we go through this, but my last little thing that I want you to know is a couple of things about how these characteristics of viruses were made or how it was discovered. First of all, we have this story of a man, of a scientist named Stanley Wendell. And I'll write that down for you right here. His name is Stanley Wendell, Wendell. And Stanley Wendell was one of the scientists that was trying to figure out why this tobacco was not growing correctly. It was stunting its growth, and for some reason these plants were just growing that were normally supposed to be this tall, way up here. they ended up only growing to about this tall, and it stunted their growth so small that they wanted to figure out what was going on. And so they discovered that they thought it was bacteria that was doing it, but they discovered something other than bacteria that was causing this, what they called TMV, which is tobacco mosaic disease. And they didn't know what it was. So, what they saw was under a microscope, whenever they were looking through the microscope hole, they saw these little bacteria things that were about this big, but then they saw something that was a little bit smaller than bacteria. And Stanley Wendell decided to call it a virus, meaning the word poison. So, here's his name again. In 1935, he concluded that it was a chemical rather than the organism. It was smaller than stuff, smaller than prokaryotic cells, which are bacteria, so it's smaller than them. And so that's how we found out that it was a virus. So we found out that it lives and only reproduces only inside of other living cells. So it has to have a host. It has to find something that it can live inside of, and then that's when I'll draw a V for virus. Once it gets inside of it, that's when it can begin making more of itself, more viruses. And that's when it can also actually become alive because it's living inside of something else living. So this causes things such as colds, flu, AIDS, smallpox, measles, all of these things right here. So on your notes, virus means poisons, and then a virus is made up of two things. And so we've got that right here. A virus is made up of two things. One of those things is called a capsid, or a protein, which is just called the capsid. And then lastly, DNA or RNA. And here's a couple of viruses right down here that we will begin to learn about. But go ahead and begin thinking about viruses that you have had. And then also think about how those viruses have been treated by doctors. What do they do? So, that's it.